3. Farid and Seth. I met Farid and Seth years before the end of the last century. This was after I'd met the body thief, but before I'd met Memnoch, and I thought the encounter was an accident at the time. I realized later it most certainly was not, as they'd been searching for me. It was in Los Angeles on a mild and lovely evening when I agreed to talk to them in a garden cafe not far from where they'd approached me on Sunset Boulevard. Two powerful vampires, one ancient and one young, who was fueled by the powerful blood of the other. Seth was the ancient one. And as always, with those great survivors, I knew him by his heartbeat long before I ever saw him. They can cloak their minds, these antique monsters, and they can pass for human, yes, no matter how old they are, and they do. But they can't stop an immortal like me from hearing that heartbeat along with it, a faint sound like respiration. Only it sounds like an engine purring when it comes from them. And that's the signal, of course, to run, unless you want to be burnt to a fine black powder or a little grease spot on a pavement. But I don't run from anything, and I wasn't very sure I wanted to be alive any longer back then. I'd lately burnt my skin to a dark brown in the Gobi Desert in a failed attempt to end it all. And to say I had a devil-may-care attitude would have been an understatement. Also, I'd survived so much. Well, wouldn't I survive another encounter with another ancient one? I knew the twins firsthand, did I not? I knew the reigning queen. Did I not have their protection? But I had known something else as well back then, even then. And that was my rock singing, my videos, my waking of the queen who had a number of immortals around the globe, and who and what they were, nobody really knew for certain. I just knew they were out there. And so here I was walking down Sunset in the thick of the crowds, just loving it, kind of. Forgetting I was a monster, forgetting I was no longer a rock star, and pretending more or less to be the beautiful John Bon Jovi. I'd just caught a John Bon Jovi concert a few months prior to this, and on my little Walkman, I was playing his songs over and over, obsessively. And there I was, strutting, flirting, now and then smiling at those pulchritudious mortals drifting by, now and then lifting my rose-colored glasses to wink at this one or that, and letting my hair blow free in that eternal, chilling West Coast breeze, and just, well, having a good time, and a bitter time when there comes that heartbeat, that fatal heartbeat. Well, Maharat Mokare had not disappeared from the world entirely by this point, so I thought. What have I done now? And who's going to bother me about it? When I spy coming towards me these two remarkable blood drinkers, the shorter one, a good 6 feet in height, with magnificent golden skin and blue-black curling hair around his handsome and inquisitive face, and enormous green eyes, and well-formed lips, and an open smile. Clothes natty, I suppose, an English bespoke suit, if I was any judge, and beautiful narrow tan bespoke shoes, too. And the taller one, the thin giant, very dark of skin, too, but burnt, I could tell that, and ancient. His black hair, very short, all over his well-shaped skull, with his almond eyes, and his clothes eccentric for the streets of West Hollywood, though not perhaps for the city of Cairo or Jeddah. A white ankle-length linen thaw and white pants with open sandals. What a pair! And before I'm 5 feet away, the shorter man, the young one, new in the blood, extended his hand in welcome. At once he started speaking to me in resident Anglo-Indian voice, and he started saying he was Dr. Farid Pansale, and this was his mentor, Seth, and they would so love to have the pleasure of my company at their favorite cafe nearby. There surged in me some little excitement that almost brought me to tears, but I kept that locked away from them. I'd made my loneliness, didn't I? I started all the way back then. So why all the emotion? The cafe was beautiful with tables draped in blue linen. That was. Almost the color of the night sky, with the endless illumination of the great sprawling metropolis bouncing off the layer of moist cloud. And there was a thin, sweet sitar music playing with melodic threads lacing in and out of my thoughts as we sat there, each of us now playing with our food, and now and then lifting a fork full of curry to savor the aroma. And the wine was bright and glistening in the sheer glass goblets, and they astonished me. See that building across the street? No, no, that one. Well, that was their building, and it housed their laboratory, and they'd welcomed my cooperation in offering them a few biopsies that would not cause the least pain: skin tissue, hair, blood, that kind of thing. Then the story unraveled of how in Mumbai last year Seth had come into Farid's hospital room where Farid lay dying. A brilliant research scientist, a medical doctor in his prime, as the result of a plot on the part of his wife and a fellow medical researcher. Farid, in a locked in coma, had thought Seth a figment of his tortured imagination. And you know, he said to me in rippling and exquisite Anglo Indian accent, I thought the first thing I would do was take revenge on my wife and her lover. They'd stolen everything from me, including my life. But I forgot about those things almost instantly. Seth had been a healer in ancient times. When he spoke, his speech was accented too, but I couldn't place it. And how could I, since he'd been brought into the blood at the dawn of history? He was what people called raw-boned, with wondrously symmetrical bones in his face and even his hands. They were huge. Wrist bones and knuckle bones were interesting to me, as well as his fingernails, like glass, of course. And then there was the way his cold face would fire with expression when he spoke, and the master-like smoothness imposed by the blood that would be banished. I brought Farid into the blood to be a physician, Seth explained. I can't understand the science of these times, and I do not understand why there is no physician or scientific researcher among us. Now they had their laboratory complete with every conceivable machine in medical science had invented, and soon I found myself in that building on those upper floors, following them through the brightly lighted chamber after chamber, following them through brightly lighted chamber after chamber, and marveling at the staff of the young blood drinkers ready to make the MRA or the CAT scan or to draw my blood. But what are you going to do with this data? I asked. And how do you do all this? I mean, are you bringing over scientists into the blood? Have you never seriously thought of such a thing? Farid asked. After the biopsies and the vials were taken, they were sitting on their rooftop garden, great banks of tempered glass separating us from the chill Pacific wind and the lights of downtown Los Angeles dazzling in the pretty mist. I don't understand, said Farid. In a world in which most outspoken and high-profile blood drinkers are all romantics, poets, who bring into the blood only those whom they love for emotional reasons. Oh, I do so appreciate your writing. You understand every word of it. Your books are scripture for the undead. Seth gave them to me at once, told me to learn them. But have you never thought to bring over those whom you actually need? I admitted I was afraid of the very idea. As afraid as a mortal might have been of designing offspring genetically to enter certain branches of the arts or certain professions. But we are not human, said Farid. He was immediately embarrassed by how obvious and foolish it sounded. He actually blushed. What if another blood tyrant arises? I asked. Someone to make Akasha look like a schoolgirl with her fantasies of world domination. You do realize everything I wrote about her was true, do you not? She would have transformed the world if we hadn't stopped her, made herself into a goddess. Farid was speechless and then glanced at Seth with the most anxious expression on his face. But Seth was only regarding me with intense interest. He reached over with one of his enormous hands and gently laid it on Farid's right hand. This is all well and good, he said to Farid. Please, Lestat, continue. Well, suppose such a tyrant rose amongst us, I said, and suppose that tyrant brought into the blood the technicians and soldiers he needed to implement some true takeover. With Akasha, it was all primitive, her scheme with a revealed religion at the core that would have set the world back. But suppose with laboratories like this, a tyrant could create a vampire race of weapons, makers of mind-altering drugs, makers of bombs, planes, whatever it needed to wreak havoc on the existing technological world. What then? Yes, you are right. Those of us who are known to everyone today are romantics. We are. We are poets. But we are individuals with an immense faith in an individual and a love of that individual. I broke off. I sounded far too much like someone who actually believed in something. Lestat, the dreamer. What did I believe? That we were an accursed race and that we ought to be exterminated. Seth picked up the thought at once. He responded. His voice was deep, low, sharpened by indefinable Eastern accent. Why do you believe all these things of us? You have rejected the revealed religions of your world so thoroughly. What are we? We are mutations, but all evolution is driven surely by mutations. I don't claim to understand it, but was it not true what you wrote and how Akasha had destroyed, and how the core, the font, whatever you call it, the root that animates us was transferred into the body and the brain of Makari? Yes, it was all true, I said. And they are out there, those two, and the they are the retiring kind, I assure you. And if they think we have any right to exist as a species, they've made it known not to the rest of us. If they find out about the laboratory, they will destroy it, perhaps. I hastened to add that I wasn't certain about all that. Why would they do that when we can offer them so much? Asked Farid. For I can fashion immortal eyes for Maharat, the blind one, so that she no longer must use human eyes, ever changing them as they die in her eye sockets. It is very simple matter to me to make these immortal eyes with proper blood protocols. And the mute Makare, I could determine whether there is any brain left for her in which it will ever fully awaken. I must have smiled bitterly. What a vision. Lestat, don't you know what your cells are made of? He asked. Don't you want to know what chemicals are in the blood that's keeping senescence in your body completely at bay? Senescence. I didn't quite know what the word meant. We are dead things, I was thinking. You are a physician for the dead. Ah, but Lestat, Farid said, we are not dead things. That's the poetry, and the old poetry, and it will not endure. Only good poetry endures. We're very much alive, all of us. Your body's a complex organism playing host to another predatory organism that is somehow transforming it little by little, year by year, for some distinct evolutionary purpose. Don't you want to know what that is? These words changed everything in me. They were light dawning because I saw then a whole realm of possibility that I'd never seen before. Of course, he might do things like that. Of course. He talked on and on scientifically and I suppose brilliantly, but his terminology became thicker and more foreign. Try as I might, I'd never been able to fathom modern science at all. No amount of preternatural intelligence allowed me to really absorb medical tests. I had only the layman's smattering of the words he was using: DNA, mitochondria, viruses, eukaryotic cell tissue, senescence, genome, atoms, quarks, whatever. I pored over the books of those who wrote for popular audience and retained little or nothing but respect and humility and a deepening sense of my own wretchedness at the being outside of life when life itself involved such a magnificent revelation or such magnificent revelations. He sensed it was useless. Come, let me show you a very small part of what I can do, said Farid. And down he went into the laboratories again. Almost all the blood drinkers were gone, but I caught the faint scent of human, maybe more than one human. He offered me a tantalizing possibility. Did I want to feel erotic passion the same way I'd known when I was a young man of 20 in Paris before I died? Well, he could help me achieve this, and if he did, I would produce semen, and he would like to take a sample of that. I was stunned. Of course. I wasn't about to turn this down. Well, just how are we going to collect the semen? I asked, laughing, and even blushing in spite of myself. Even when I was alive, I preferred to carry out all my erotic experiments with others. He offered me a choice. Behind the glass wall where we sat on a large, soft bed, a young human female, clad only in white flannel sleeping shirt, reading a thick hardcover book under a dim lamp. She couldn't see us through the one-way glass. She couldn't hear us. I figured her to be perhaps 35 or 6. She was quite young for these times, though it would not have been 200 years ago. I had to confess to myself she looked familiar to me. Her hair was thick and long and wavy and distinctly blonde, rather dark blonde, and she had deep-set blue eyes, which were a little too pale, perhaps, to be looking beautiful, but well-balanced features and rather innocent-looking but generous mouth. The room was like a stage set with its blue toilet wallpaper and bedding, and frilly shaded lamps, and even a picture on the wall that one might find in a common bedroom of the old 19th century English village street. Geese in a creek and a bridge. Only the medical texts on the bedside table and the heavy book in the woman's hand seemed out of place. She looked luscious in her flannel shirt, her white flannel shirt, with high, firm breasts and long, well-shaped legs. She was marking something in her book with a pen. You may couple with her, in which case I shall take the sample from her, Farid explained. Or you may take the sample from me yourself, as you desire, in your old solitary way. He made a gesture with his hand, his right hand opening his 5 fingers. I didn't ponder that for long. When I'd slipped into a human body, thanks to the machinations of the body thief, I'd enjoyed the company of 2 beautiful women, but that had not been in this body, my vampiric body. The woman is well paid, respected at home here, said Seth. She is a doctor herself. You will neither surprise her nor horrify her. She has never been a part of such experiment, but she is prepared for it, and she will be rewarded when it's over. Well, if no harm comes to her, I thought. How clean and pretty she was, with that well-scrubbed American look to her, and those shiny blue eyes, and her hair, the color of fields of grain. I could almost smell her hair. In fact, I could smell it, a lovely fragrance of soap suds or shampoo and sunshine. She looked delectable and irresistible. I wanted every single drop of her blood. Could erotic feeling override all that? All right, I'll do it. But just how exactly could these gentlemen make a dead body like mine actually produce seed as if it were living? The answer came swiftly with a series of injections and indeed an intravenous line that would continue throughout the experiment to deliver a powerful elixir of human hormones into my blood, overriding the vampiric body's natural tendency to resist senescence long enough for the desire to develop, the sperm to be produced, and then ejaculated. I thought this was hilariously funny. Now, I could write an essay of 500 pages on how this experience unfolded because I did feel biological, erotic desire again. And I fell on the young woman about as mercilessly as any greedy aristocrat of my time ever fell on a milkmaid in his village. But it was precisely as my beloved Louis had said it a long time ago, the pale shadow of killing. The pale shadow of killing. That is, the pale shadow of drinking blood, and it was almost over at once. It seemed then passion was gone back into the depths of memory once more, as if it had never been aroused. The pinnacle, the ejaculation, forgotten. I had felt awkward afterwards. I was sitting on the bed beside this blonde-haired, fair-skinned human female, my back to a nest of sweet-smelling linen-covered pillows, and I felt I ought to talk to her, ask her how she came to be here, and why was she here? And then, quite suddenly, as I sat there wondering if this was proper or even wise, she told me. Her name was Flannery Gillian, she said, in a clear West Coast American voice. She explained that she had been studying us since the night I had appeared on stage as a rock star outside San Francisco, and so many of our kind had died as a result of my great scheme to be a mortal performer. She'd seen vampires that night with her own eyes and had no doubt of their existence. She'd seen them immolated in the parking lot afterwards. Indeed, she'd scraped up samples of their burnt and oozing remains from the asphalt. She'd gathered burnt vampiric bones in plastic sacks, and she'd developed hundreds of photographs later of what she'd witnessed and captured on film. She'd spent 5 years studying and writing up her various experiments, specimens, preparing a 1,000-page document to prove our existence and counter every objection she could anticipate from her medical colleagues. She'd gone broke because of her obsession. What had it all come to? Utter ruin. Even though she connected with at least 24 other doctors who claimed to have seen and experimented upon vampires, perusing their samples, reviewing their material, and referencing it, she had found the doors of every reputable medical association in the world slammed in her face. She was laughed at, ridiculed, denied grant money, and ultimately denied admission to conventions and conferences, and pointed out publicly as a laughingstock by those who ostracized her and advised her to get psychological help. They destroyed me, she said calmly. They ruined me. I did it all. They did it to all of us. They cast us out along with the believers in the ancient astronauts, pyramid power, ectoplasm, and lost city of Atlantis. They sent me into the wilderness of crackpot websites and New Age conventions and fringe gatherings where we were welcomed only by enthusiasts who believed in everything from Ouija boards to Bigfoot. My license to practice medicine was revoked in California. My family turned against me, and I was, for all practical purposes, dead. I see, I said dismally. I wonder if you do, she said. There's abundant evidence in the hands of science and all over the planet that you exist, but nobody's ever going to do a damn thing about it, at least not as things are now. I was speechless. I should have known. I used to think that once a vampire fell into the hands of doctors, it would be over. She laughed. It's happened many times, she said, and I can tell you exactly what takes place. The vampire, having been taken captive in some sheltered place by day, wakes up at sundown to destroy his captors and lay waste to their jail or their laboratory or their morgue. If he or she is too weak to do that, then the captors are generally spellbound, befuddled into releasing the victim, and retribution soon follows. With all the photographic or medical evidence emulated along with the witnesses. Sometimes other blood drinkers come to help free the captive. Sometimes an entire lab facility goes up in flames, and almost everyone on the premises is killed. I documented at least 2 dozen accounts that fit this pattern. Every single one has a series of official, rational explanations of what happened attached to it, with marginalized survivors ridiculed and ultimately ignored. Some survivors have wound up in mental hospitals. You don't have to worry about a thing. And so now you work with Farid. I have a place here, she said with a gentle smile. I'm respected here for what I know. You could say I've been reborn. Oh, you cannot imagine the little fool I was that night when I saw you on stage, so certain I was going to take a medical world by storm with all those pictures. What did you want to happen? I mean, what did you want to happen to us? I wanted to believe. I wanted to be believed, first and foremost, and then I wanted you to be studied. The very thing that Farid's doing here. This is no rhyme or reason to what is actually studied out there, she gestured, as if the mortal world were on the other side of the wall. It doesn't matter anymore to me, she added. I work for Farid. I laughed under my breath. The warm, natural, erotic feeling was long gone. What I wanted to do again, of course, was drain every drop of blood out of her precious, adorable, curvaceous, hot little body. But I settled for kissing her, snuggling up to her and pressing my lips against her warm throat, listening to that thunder of blood in her artery. They've promised to bring you over, haven't they? I asked. Yes, she said. They're honorable, and that's more than I can say for my colleagues in the American medicine. In American medicine. She turned to me, drawing close enough to kiss me quickly one more time on that cheek. I didn't stop her. Her fingers went up to my face, and she touched my eyelids. Thank you, she said. Thank you for these priceless moments. Oh, I know you didn't do this for me. You did it for them, but thank you. I nodded and smiled. I held her face in my hands as I kissed her now, with a fervor that came from the blood. I could feel her body warming, opening like a flower, but the moment that was gone. And I took my leave. Later, Farid and Seth told me they meant to keep that promise. She wasn't the only crazy vampire-obsessed doctor or scientist they've invited in. As a matter of fact, they went out of their way to recruit these poor loonies, whom the whole world had ostracized. It was easier, after all, to invite them into our miracle, those whose human lives were already ruined. Well, before dawn, the three of us hunted together. Sunset Boulevard was a mob scene, as they say, and the little drink was everywhere to be had. And so were a couple of despicable rogues whom I fed on with cruel abandon in the back streets. I think the medical experiments had left me desperately thirsty. I was letting the blood fill my mouth and holding it in like that for a long time before swallowing, before feeling the great wash of warmth through my limbs. Seth was a ruthless killer. The ancient ones almost always are. I watched him drain a young male victim and watched the body shrivel as. Seth drew a quart after quart of the vital fluid. He held the dead boy's head against his chest. I knew he wanted to crush the skull, and then he did, tearing open the hairy wrapping around it and sucking the blood from the brain. Then he decomposed the corpse, almost lovingly, on piles of refuse in the alley. Folding the arms across the chest, closing the eyes, he'd even reshaped the skull and smoothed the torn scalp over it, and stepped back from it as if he were a priest inspecting a sacrifice, murmuring something under his breath. Seth and I sat on the roof garden as the morning was coming. The birds had begun to sing, and I could feel the sun, smell of trees welcoming the sun, smell of jacaranda blossoms opening far below. But what will you do, my friend? I said, if the twins come, if the twins don't want this grand experiment to continue. I am as old as they are, Seth answered quietly. He raised his eyebrows. He looked elegant in the long white thaw, with its neat collar. Rather priestly, in fact. And I can protect Farid from them. He seemed completely sure of it. Long centuries ago, he said, there were two warring camps, as the Queen told you. The twins and their friend Kaiman were there. They were known as the First Blood, and they fought the cult of the Mother. But I was made by her to fight the First Blood, and I have more of her blood in me than they ever had. Queen's blood, that is. We were aptly called, and she brought me over for very one important reason. I was her son, born to her when she was human. A dark chill ran through me. For a long time, I couldn't speak. I couldn't think. Her son, I finally whispered. I do not hate them, he said. I never wanted, even in those times, to fight them, really. I was a healer. I did not ask for the blood. Indeed, I begged my mother to spare me, but you know how she is and what she was. You know how she was to be obeyed, and she would be obeyed. You know, as well as anyone from those times knows those things, and she brought me into the blood. And as I said, I do not fear those who fought against her. I am strong as they are. I remained in awe. I could see in him now the resemblance to her, see it in the symmetry of his features, the special curve of his lips, but I couldn't sense her in him at all. As a healer, I traveled the world in my human life, he said, responding to my thoughts. His eyes were gentle. I sought to learn all I could in the cities of the two rivers. I went far into the northern forests. I wanted to learn and understand, to know, to bring back with me great healers of Egypt. My mother had no use for such things. She was convinced of her own divinity and blind to the miracles of the natural world. How well I understood. It was time for me to be taking my leave. How long he could withstand the coming dawn, I didn't know. But I was about spent, and it was time to seek shelter. I thank you for welcoming me here, I said. You come to us any time you wish, he said. He gave me his hand. I stared into his eyes and felt strongly that I did see resemblance to Akasha, though she had been far more delicate, far more conventionally beautiful. He had a fierce, cold light in his eyes. He smiled. I wish I had something to give you, I said. I wish I had something to offer you in return. Oh, but you have given us so much. What, those samples? I scoffed. I meant hospitality, warmth, something I'm passing through. I've been passing through for the longest time. You did give us both something else, he said, though you do not know it. What? From your mind, we learned that what you wrote of the Queen of the Damned was true. We had to know if you described truthfully what you saw when my mother died. You see, we could not entirely phantom it. It is not so easy to decapitate one so powerful. We are so strong. Surely you know this. Well, yes, but even the oldest flesh can be pierced, sliced. I stopped. I swallowed. I couldn't speak of such a crude and unfeeling way. I couldn't think of the spectacle again. I severed her head, the body, the body struggling to get to the head, arms reaching. And now you know, I said. I took a deep breath and banished all that from my mind. I described it precisely. He nodded, a dark shadow passed over his face. We can always be dispatched in that way, he said, narrowed eyes as if reflecting. Reflecting. Decapitation, surer than immolation when we're speaking of the ancient ones, of most ancient. A silence fell between us. I loved her, you know, I said. I loved her. Yes, I do know, he said. And you see, I did not. And so this doesn't matter very much to me. What matters much more is that I love you. I was deeply moved, but I couldn't find the words to say what I wanted so much to say. I put his arms around him and kissed him. We'll see each other again, I said. Yes, that's my devout wish, he whispered. Years later, when I came searching for them, hungering for them, desperate to know if they were all right, I couldn't find them. In fact, I'd never actually found them again. I didn't dare to send out a telepathic call for them. I had always kept my knowledge of them tightly locked in my heart, out of fear for them. And for a long time I lived in terror that Maharat and Makare had destroyed them. Sometime later, a few years later, into the new century, I did something that was rather unusual for me. I'd been brooding over how Akasha died, thinking about the mystery of how we could so easily be destroyed by decapitation. I went into the shop of a specialist, antique armor and weaponry, and hired him to make me a weapon. This was in Paris. I designed the weapon myself. It looked on paper like a medieval horseman's axe with a narrow 2-foot handle and a half-moon blade with a length of maybe 12 inches. I wanted the handle to be weighted as heavy as the craftsman could make it. And that blade, it had to be weighted too, but deadly sharp. I wanted the sharpest metal on earth, whatever it was. There was to be a hook and a leather thong at the end of the handle, just like medieval times. So I could wear that thong around my wrist or carry the axe blade down beneath one of my long frock coats. The craftsman produced a beauty. He warned me it was too heavy for a man to comfortably swing. I wasn't going to like it. I laughed. It was perfect. The gleaming crescent-shaped blade could slice and pierce a ripe fruit in half, or a silk scarf blowing in the breeze. It was heavy enough to destroy a tender tree in the forest with one powerful swing. After that, I kept my little battle axe near at hand and often wore it, hung from a button inside my coat. When I went out roaming, its weight was nothing to me. I knew I wouldn't have much of a chance against the fire gift from an immortal like Seth or Maharat or Makare, but I could use it. I could use the cloud gift to escape. And in a face-to-face confrontation with other mortals with this axe, I'd have a terrific advantage. If used with the element of surprise, it could probably take down anyone. But then, how do you surprise the very ancient ones? Well, I had to try to protect myself, didn't I? I don't like being at the mercy of others, and I don't like being at the mercy of God. I polished and sharpened the axe now and then. I worried a lot about Seth and Fareed. I heard tell of them once in New York and another time in New Mexico, but I couldn't find them. At least they were alive. At least the twins hadn't destroyed them. Well, maybe the twins would not. And as the years passed, there were more and more indications that Maharat and Makare thought little or not at all about the rest of the world of the undead. Which leads me now into my meeting with Jesse and David 2 years ago.